All right, class. Okay, good morning. We're going to start a new lesson today, but first we're going to do a little reviewing on what we've been talking about in the past. Can anyone tell me what we've been working with?
Bar graph.
We've been talking about bar graphs. That's exactly right. So up here we have an example of a bar graph, like something we've been talking about. And up here from the title we can see that it's student grades. So we know by reading our title that we know that our graph is going to be showing us information about student grades. All right, can anyone tell me in your own words what a bar graph is?
It tells us how many we have in different heights.
Right, the bars tell us the values by their different heights. And they also tell us numbers. Like right here, we can say that our tallest bar is purple, and our tallest bar is 12. So we know that if this is about student grades, and we look down at the bottom of our bar, and this category is a B. So students that got a B is our tallest category, so that means it has the most students got a B, and there are 12 of them. So that's how we read our bar graph. Does anyone have any questions over that before we move on to our next part of the day? Awesome, okay. All right, well today, instead of talking about bar graphs, we're talking about pictographs, which are very, very similar to bar graphs, but they're actually different because instead of using bars to show the different values and the different quantities, pictographs actually use pictures, and so that's why we call them pictographs. It's because they use pictures or symbols to show the values or the quantities. So instead of looking at the different heights or the different lengths of the bars, today we're actually going to be looking at pictures and counting pictures. Does everyone remember how to count? Awesome. Okay, great. So we're going to do great at today's lesson. Some of you guys actually might find pictographs easier than bar graphs. So, for our first example, I want you guys to look at the title. What is our title of this graph?
Running laps.
Running laps. So the first thing we know about this graph is that it's going to be something about running. And then we have some names down here. And so each one of these different categories is about people running laps. So what is the first thing you notice about this graph here?
Pictures.
There are pictures. So this is very different than our bar graph, right? It has pictures to show the different lengths. Do you see any numbers on this graph? No. So it doesn't tell us the numbers. We have to count it. We're going to count by the different pictures and symbols that are on here. So who can tell me what our biggest category is? The one with the most that you can see from the graph? Yusuf, this last column or row right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how we're going to read and interpret a pictograph, which uses pictures to show our information. So I want you to count with me. Every time that I'm doing a pictograph and I start counting, I want you guys to count with me. So ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this Yusuf category has 9 shoes right here. And if we're talking about running laps, then that probably means that each one of these shoes counts for 1 lap. So we know by counting this, we counted 9 shoes. We know that Yusuf ran 9 laps. See how easy that was? Do we have any questions before we move on? No? Awesome. Okay. So we can also tell by this graph that the least amount, the person with the least amount of laps is Chin Ho. He has the least amount of laps because how many shoes does he have?
1.
1, and that means 1 lap. So he only ran 1 lap while Yusuf ran 9. All right, awesome. Do we have any questions before we move on? Our next example here is this graph, this pictograph. What is the first thing you notice about this graph?
Snowflakes.
Snowflakes. So what do you think, from looking at the pictures of snowflakes, that this graph might have to do with?
Snow.
Snow. It may have something to do with snow. You're right. Let's investigate a little bit further and think. What is the title of this graph here?
Favorite snow activity.
Favorite snow activities. Awesome. So if we look at the categories here, we have some different snow activities like making snowmen or sledding or skiing. So what we're going to do is we're going to count these different snowflakes, and since this is a pictograph, all the different pictures or symbols represent the different people who like these different snow activities. So for example, which is the smallest category or the smallest row you can see on this graph?
Snowballs.
Making snowballs. It's this one right here, right? Because we can see that the amount of snowflakes on this graph is smaller than all the other ones. That's why pictographs are so easy to look, because you can tell which ones have the least and which ones have the greatest. And actually, we have a tie here for the greatest. Making snowmen and snowshoeing have the same number of snowflakes. And we can see that just by looking. We don't even have to count. But if we wanted to count, the smallest amount is making snowballs, just like Becca here said. So if we want to count, let's all count together. 1, 2, 3. 3 people, their favorite snow activity is making snowballs. All right. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to our last example? Okay, awesome. All right, for our last example, we have this graph right here. The graph is called apple picking, and I want to see if you guys can notice, so let's put on our thinking caps, see if you guys can notice something that's different about this graph that we didn't have in our last graphs.
At the bottom.
Something right here at the bottom, you're right. This is called a key. So you guys will see this in our other graphs that we've been working with, and I want you guys to take notice of it this time, because in the other ones we had, we didn't have this, right? Okay, awesome. So this graph has a key, which basically is like when investigators need a key to unlock something, we use our keys to help us better understand our graph. So you may see a key and it tells you what the picture means. So in this one it says each apple, so each picture of the apple equals 1 real apple. So it's going to keep us counting the same way, but one time maybe it might say each apple means 2 apples. So we would have to skip count to find however many this column was talking about, or this row was talking about. So, but in this case, it just says 1 apple. So we're going to keep counting like we did normally. So who can tell me what the biggest, if you could just tell me first, second, third, or fourth, which row has the greatest amount of apples?
Second.
The second row, right here. So apple picking has a list of names, so we know that this row is talking about who picked the most apples. So if we count, let's count together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 apples. So this person actually picked 9 apples, and we know that because the key tells us that each picture of an apple equals 1 apple. Awesome, guys. You guys are doing so great. Is there anything else that I can answer any questions before we move on? Okay, awesome. So we're going to do a quick review before we move on to our activity. So just so we can review, what kind of graphs have we been talking about today?
Picture.
Close, they're called pictographs. Okay, so our pictographs, who can give me a definition of what a pictograph is?
Pictures represent numbers.
Pictures represent numbers. That's a great way to explain it. So instead of like bars, instead of having different bars to show the different amount of quantities each category has in the graph, we're actually going to use pictures and symbols. So that makes it more creative and more fun and easy to see. We can definitely see how many each has because they're symbols represented by pictures. And so this is a visual type of graph, and these graphs help us get across information. So that's what we've been talking about today. And we have one last example. So in this one, can you help me count the different number in each category in this one? No, you can't count the categories, right? Because do we have any pictures or symbols? No. So is this a pictograph?
No.
No, it's not. Exactly. So like in this one, in order to interpret this graph, we count, right? But in this one, this is actually a bar graph. This is what we talked about at the beginning. And we can't count anything in this because this shows it has graphs to show our quantities and values. In a pictograph, it's always going to have pictures and symbols. So that's how you tell them apart. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to our fun activity? All right, great. So before you guys move back to your tables, I'm going to explain what we're doing today. We're actually going to be making our own pictographs with your table group. So I'm going to pass out these handouts for you guys, and when you move back to your table groups, each one of you is going to get one piece of paper, and I'm going to give you a jar of marbles. Inside the jar, it's going to have red, green, and yellow marbles. What you're going to do is you're going to follow the directions on here. It tells you how to do it. You're going to count each kind of marble that you have, each different color, and you're going to make a pictograph with your table group to show me and show the class however many marbles you had in each one. And our pictures of what we're going to represent on our graph for the marbles, are going to be pom-poms. So I'm going to actually pass out pom-poms to your group, and you're going to use this small part at the bottom of each worksheet, every handout that you give, and you're going to glue on the pom-poms, kind of like the apples here in this picture. You're going to glue on the pom-poms to represent how many of each color you have. So you have a green row, you have a red row, and a yellow row. And all of these questions up here are going to help you make your graph to begin with. So you guys are going to work together as a team, and you're going to use the skills that we've been working on today to create your own graph and to practice using these skills. So does anybody have any questions before we move on?
Do we have to write how many marbles are in our jar on the graph?
No, actually, see, that's the point of our picture graph. Just like on this graph, we didn't have any numbers, right? We counted to figure out how many numbers we had. So on this pictograph, you're just going to glue your pom-poms, and that's going to be able to tell you how many of each marble you had. You're not going to write any numbers at all. On our bar graphs, they do have numbers sometimes, and they have different quantities. But this one is just going to be represented with pictures and symbols. That's actually the point of a picture graph. Great question. Thanks for asking that. All right, so we're going to move on, and we're going to, I'm going to be walking around. You guys are going to get started with your groups. I'm going to pass out your handouts, and I'll be walking around answering any questions you guys have. Class, we can move back to the carpets now. Everyone did a great job working in their groups and creating your graphs. You guys are doing great with this. So, can you tell me what we've been talking about today?
Pictographs.
Pictographs, perfect. We've been talking about pictographs, and can you even explain to me what a pictograph is? We have an example up here.
Pictures mean numbers.
Pictures mean different values. So they're a graph to get across information, to convey information to somebody using pictures. So it's really fun and creative and interesting. And can anyone tell me a way or maybe how you could use a pictograph, why that would be important to us in our real lives?
Apples.
Yes, it could be apples, like if you wanted to convey information about different apples in a grocery store or something like that. But I'm thinking of a way, like what if you wanted to convince your parents that you're the most responsible out of all of your siblings? So you gathered information about how many times you cleaned your room compared to how many times your brother or sister cleaned your room, and you made a graph to show them. That would be a lot better for you to show your parents than just telling them all this information. So our importance of graphs is that it's a lot easier to look at information, and it looks a lot better. It's easier to convey information like this than it is if we just wrote out different numbers in a paragraph. So that's why graphs are important, and actually I want you guys to be thinking in your heads of ways that you can use pictographs in real life, because you're going to make your own project, and you're going to gather some information and make a graph to show your classmates, and you're going to convince us of something that you're passionate about. So I want you to be thinking in your heads of an idea or something you can do for your project that we're going to do later on. And all the stuff that we've learned today and all the skills that we've used are actually going to come in handy when we continue looking at graphs and different kinds of graphs. But today you guys did a great job, and I'm so thankful for you guys being good listeners and good workers and good investigators. So does anybody have any questions? All right, great job. Thanks, guys.